evening, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm Helen Sanders, and I'm Director of Education here at the Parthenon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's symposium on Tennessee women athletes, Tennessee Trailblazers. We are joined by Dr. Ellen Pethel, who is an author, historian, and professor at Belmont. And this talk is based on her book called Title IX, Pat Summitt and Tennessee's Trailblazers, 50 Years, 50 Stories. We are also joined by Renee Schultz, who is Senior Associate Athletic Director for Student Athlete Success and the Senior Woman Administrator at Belmont University, who will be sharing her personal perspective as an athlete and administrator. We are here in part because we are all being inspired by Alan LeQuire's Monumental Figures exhibit, including the Soaring Olympians above our heads. So let me back up and explain that it is 35 years since Alan completed the Athena statue. And we are celebrating 35 years of Athena by inviting Alan back to create an exhibit of figures this summer. And he chose real women who've been inspiring to him in his personal life, and profiles in courage, women of courage and accomplishment, some well-known, some who deserve to be better known. And we have above our heads a runner inspired by Wilma Rudolph and the Tiger Bells. And we need to acknowledge their accomplishment, their coach, Ed Temple, and really the amazing accomplishment of these women runners at TSU. We also have a swimmer inspired in part by some local Olympians, Tracy Calkins, whose name is on our Centennial Sportsplex pool, and the Walsh sisters, and Simone Biles and other gymnasts. Now, your job in the audience is to not get too distracted by this and keep your attention on our speakers, if you can. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our colleagues in Metro Parks and Rec. The Parthenon is part of the Metro Parks division. So we want to highlight our neighbors at Centennial Sportsplex and throughout Metro Parks who provide health and wellness and fitness programming for our whole community. And we also want to acknowledge and thank our nonprofit partners, Centennial Parks Conservancy, for the support that they provide for Parthenon exhibits, Parthenon programs, and many other programs throughout the park and its facilities. And now I'll just take a moment to say just a little bit more about our speakers. So Ellen Pethel, as I said, is an author, historian, and associate professor at Belmont. She's written on many topics centered on Nashville and Tennessee history, including the book we've mentioned about women athletes, and also a book that's of interest to many of us who work here at the Parthenon, Athens of the New South, College Life and the Making of Modern Nashville. And she has a forthcoming book later this fall on Minnie Pearl. She is also the director of the digital platform Nashville Sites, which offers free digital self-guided tours. And I understand there's a new tour coming out focused on Centennial Park. Renee Schultz is now in her 22nd year at Belmont, where she has been a champion for student athletes. She was mentored by the Belmont legend Betty Wiseman, another woman athletic director who now I understand now recently has a new dorm named after her on campus. And so she started as an athlete and came to Nashville to be part of one of Belmont's very earliest women's soccer teams, became a coach and an athletic director herself. And we're just delighted that they both could find their way here to us this evening.
Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. I came in to see Athena, and she's 42 feet tall. So not that I have a short complex, but she's got me by about 38 feet. And so we're delighted to be here, and especially with the Monumental Figures exhibit. This is going to be a great event, and so I just hope to give you a little information about women's sports in Tennessee, and then to bring in Renee to help complete the conversation, and then we'll take some questions. So, beautiful space. I have to say, out of all the book tours that I've done, this is it. This is this top, right? So, Title IX, Pat Summitt and Tennessee's Trailblazers, 50 Years, 50 Stories. I know it's a short title. But the reason why it's long is because we wanted people to be clear what it was about. You can't have a book about Pat Summitt and not have her name in the title, right? But obviously, it was coming out on the 50th anniversary of Title IX. So this came out in 2022. But we also wanted to include all of the other women whose names are not known, who did not get the credit that they deserved at the time of their careers. And so we've got all of their stories. And then as I began doing this project, I was really shooting for 15 or 20 women. And then the numbers started to grow. And oddly enough, you know, we all have our COVID story. And so mine was that I had wanted to do this book, and then I was in a coffee shop in March, and I had gotten the green light on this book, and then the world shut down, and I was like, well, there goes the book. I'm not going to be able to interview a lot of women over 65 to do this project. But in reality, you probably experienced this too, that if there was a sort of a side effect of COVID that was positive, it was that it accelerated our collective learning curve, and suddenly everybody knew how to Zoom or FaceTime, right, or Google Meet. And so what it actually did was expand the amount of people that I could get in touch with who weren't local. So I ended up interviewing Tracy Calkins in Australia. I ended up interviewing Monica Abbott, a well-known softball player. She was playing in Japan, and people all across the country. And so as that started to happen, that in addition to when I would interview women, they'd say, well, have you thought about so-and-so? And I realized how many important women I didn't know about. And so that number started to expand, and because I am also competitive, once I hit 42, I was like, oh, we got to go to 50. So we ended up doing 50. There's 35 full-length essays, and then there are 15 vignettes that are shorter, but also still capture the person's life and career. So that's how we got the title. I've got with me here Renee Schultz. She could probably do this presentation as well as I could. She's been to a lot of different book events, and I've been so appreciative of her participation and support of this project, and so you will hear from her a little bit later. But here are the 37 words of Title IX. You notice in the text that nowhere does it say gender, nowhere does it say sports, nowhere does it say athletics. And the reason is because it was the 9th page from the end of a 250-page document called the Educational Amendments of 1972, sort of tucked into the end. But the idea was that it eliminated or excluded rather, the sex discrimination. And what I tell people a lot of times is that it wasn't just sports. The reason, in a large part, that sports becomes something that's identified with Title IX is because it was at 0, and so it had the greatest room to grow, almost exponentially. And so that was the most visible thing that you could point to. So it passed overwhelmingly in 1972, and a very bipartisan vote, both in the House and Senate. It, at its heart, was about equal access and opportunity for girls and young women in public schools and higher education. But in the absence of the Equal Rights Amendment, something that I discovered in going through this book and really digging in, is that in the absence of that, it's probably the most significant piece of legislation that's had an impact on the everyday lives of real girls and women since the 19th Amendment. So I mentioned earlier why women's sports gets associated. It was Title IX's most tangible, visible beneficiary. And in Tennessee, we started even earlier. So the TCWSF, which is an acronym that I learned how to say well, but it does not roll off the tongue. The TCWSF is the Tennessee College Women's Sports Federation. It formed in 1969 and 1970, which began competitive sports at some colleges, not all colleges, but the ones that joined it. They began competing intercollegiately in that first season, 1969-1970. Then the national organization, the AIAW, was the predecessor of a national organization that eventually it did not merge with, but it went away and women's collegiate sports joined the NCAA, but not until 1981-82. So if not, I argue, for that decade of this national organization stepping up and running national programs and conferences and tournaments, I don't know if women's sports would have been positioned to really join the NCAA in the 80s and be the factor that it was almost immediately. The NCAA, as you might have inferred, they were a little bit hostile on the front end, but after about a decade, when they realized that this was not only legitimate competition, but competition that both the players and spectators and fans and schools wanted, they came in, and so it was all of the collegiate sports were with the NCAA by 1982, and the AIAW went out of business in 1983. But as a state, Tennessee had emerged as a national leader because of this, yes, but also because of some earlier trailblazers, pre-Title IX trailblazers, one of whom is represented by Wilma Rudolph and all of the Tiger Bells who were at TSU. So the Tennessee State Tiger Bells, there's Wilma Rudolph on the left, so you can see the resemblance is pretty good it looks, I walked in and I said, that's Wilma Rudolph. But that's her on the far left. On the far right here are some of the Tennessee Tiger Bells who were later on in a more recent picture with their legendary coach, Ed Temple, who started the program in the 40s. In fact, TSU and the Tiger Bells are still the most successful collegiate women's track program in not just national history, but they have won more Olympic medals representing a single school than any other school in the United States. They won medals in every Olympics from 1948 to 1984. So really impressive there. The other reason I love this picture on the right is because standing to the left in the picture of Ed Temple is Chandra Cheeseborough. Chandra Cheeseborough was the last Tiger Bell to win a medal at the Olympics in '84. She actually won 2 golds and a silver. The 2 golds she won less than an hour apart. Her nickname was Cheese, so her title is chaptered Big Win for Cheese. But she was a sprinter, but she also ended up becoming a 400 runner and broke the American record for the 4x400 as the anchor of that race. And it's in the book in the back. It tells you where to go, but you can watch that race on YouTube, and it's in LA, right? And it's still like, I can't tell you how many times I've watched it. If I'm having a bad day, I just watch Cheese just like smoke them. But when Ed Temple decided to retire in 1994, Chandra had moved back down to Florida and was coaching high school. And he called me and said, "Are you interested in this job?" And she said, no, I'm good. I'm back in Florida. That's where my family is. And so he said, okay. The next week, she got a call from Wilma Rudolph. She said, Cheese, we need you. We need you to come take this job. And so at the behest of her mentor, she saw Wilma Rudolph as one of her mentors. She took the job, and she remains today the head of women's track and field and cross country and men's track and field at TSU. So, I mean, amazing story, and she's got a great chapter in the book. The other group is a group of mostly white women. It did translate in the 60s to have some black team members, but this was the Nashville Business College. And this, if it looks like the League of Their Own era, it's because it was. They emerged in the 30s, but really took off in the 40s. And they were part of something you may have heard of through either your experience in sports or maybe your children, something called the AAU. But the AAU we see today is more of a summer league. It's like a club league. At this time, this was semi-pro, semi-collegiate basketball. There were about 10 to 12 teams in the country. And here in Nashville, we had one at the Nashville Business College. But again, when I say semi-collegiate, they came and played for Nashville Business College, but it was more of a vocational school. So many of them actually went to Peabody College. At that time was still independent as the George Peabody College for Teachers. And so they played at Municipal Auditorium. And so there's actually a historical marker going in next year for the Nashville Business College. They won 16 national championships with that AAU league within like a 25-year period. They also, this was before you had women's basketball in the Olympics. You did not have women's basketball in the Olympics until 76. So, wait, is that right? Yes, 76. They made the announcement in 72. And so, until then, they basically were the substitute or the stand-in for Team USA playing in World University Games and also World Championships until basketball was admitted into the Olympics. The one on the left here, far left, is a woman named Nera White. In one of her last interviews, she said, do you remember that move where Jordan went up and changed hands in midair and then came up and made the layup? She was like, I invented that. She's still mostly recognized as one of the top players ever to play the game. She was the second female to be inducted into the Naismith Hall of Fame for all of basketball. So she really leaves behind an amazing legacy. When she finished her career at NBC, she ended up moving back to her family's farm and passed away in the early 2000s. So, but she's a great legend that oftentimes people don't know her name and then don't think about her being in Nashville. But one of the greatest players ever played here in Nashville. So getting back to the Tennessee College Women's Sports Federation, it's going to launch in 1969. And it's going to be led by a woman named Betty Giles. You'll see her picture in another slide. But Betty Giles and some other PE teachers in the mostly Middle Tennessee, but also in East and West Tennessee, their student athletes and the girl athletes, they were all bothering them to death. As Betty Giles says, they were just pestering me to death because they wanted to play competitively. And there was an early time of competitive basketball, but it was the early 1900s. By 1925 through 1935, all of those teams went from being competitive to being more recreational and intramural. But by the time you give that another 20, 25 years, people are itching to play. So the only substitute they had was to have play days where they would go to each other's schools and basically have like a day-long tournament. Right, but it wasn't official collegiate intercompetition. So they are at a conference and they realize that all of them have student athletes who want to play competitively. So Betty says, do y'all want to start meeting and seeing if we can organize this? And they all said yes. And so they started with 15 members in 1966, and they wrote bylaws, they formed committees, they created conferences, and over those next 3 years, the membership grew to 34 schools. And the reason why I have this picture up is because they met at the Thunderbird Motel in Clarksville. And they would meet there, and Betty Giles, I always tell the story on her, and she would always tell me that it wasn't true, and except once she finally admitted it, that they would have fun, they would work all day, and then at night they would play poker and drink. So, to be a fly on the wall, I'm telling you. Betty Giles is not here tonight. I'm going to send her pictures from this event. She hates not to be here, but she now lives in Nashville, and she is 95 years strong. So she was at a lot of book events, and I decided to give her a break. So, of course, we all know Pat Summitt, and the interesting thing about Pat is that she touches all three regions of Tennessee. She was born in Middle Tennessee, right, mostly raised in Clarksville, and then later moving to Henrietta. She goes to college in West Tennessee at University of Tennessee Martin, and then we all know where she coached in East Tennessee for many, many years. So you can't have a book about Title IX in Tennessee without having Pat. And if you're worried, everybody gets one chapter, but Pat gets three. Mm-hmm. She opens each section of the book, and one is about her early days, one is about her coaching days, and the other one is about when she was in school, and also she did play for the Olympic team and won in that first Olympic team and won a silver medal. So that's her, though, and on the top left there, that's her in Cheatham County at the 4-H fair showing off her cow, and she is thrilled, as you can tell. So I just want to kind of hit the highlights, and then we'll talk more about the more recent era and bring Renee in. But in West Tennessee, so I mentioned I had a picture of Betty Giles. So you see Pat Summitt in the middle. Betty Giles is to her right in the striped sweater. Betty Giles was the athletic director at the University of Tennessee Martin. I probably should have said that earlier. That's one reason why she was trying to head up and organize all of these health and physical education teachers. And then that's Nadine Guerin on the left, and she was Pat's basketball coach. Betty tells a famous story is that they had so few athletes that she told Pat that that all their basketball players had to also play volleyball to stay in shape. And Pat said, I didn't get it, but I just went along with it anyway. Well, it ended up being that UT Martin's volleyball team made it to the national tournament because Pat was on it with some other great players. She also added that volleyball never got her in shape. So that's a picture there, UT Martin. On the far right is a woman named Betty Booker Parks. She was from a tiny town that she said was so small that if you blinked, you might miss the turn. But Memphis State, now the University of Memphis, recruited her. She got there in 1976, and that was the first year, even though Title IX was passed in 72, that was the first year that athletic scholarships were offered in most places. So she was part of the first class to receive athletic scholarships. And her story is incredible because she discusses in our interview about the role that Title IX played in her ability to be able to go to college and to be able to afford it because of that opportunity. And that's really a lot of what Title IX was, equalizing the opportunities for girls and young women, not just in sports, but in all kinds of different fields. Coming out of Title IX, you get more female lawyers and business women and politicians and, on and on. There's lots of examples. On the left here, we have a picture of the first Memphis State track team. And the person in that wonderfully plaid leisure suit in the middle is Susan Russ. And Susan Russ, if that name sounds familiar to you at all, after she left Memphis State and started that program, she was there about 9 years, she moved to Nashville with her husband, who had a job at Vanderbilt, and she accepted a position at a little girls' school called Parthenon. Over the next 34 years, she ran the track and field and cross-country programs and is still today the most winning track and field coach in Tennessee in TSSAA history. Then we've got East Tennessee. Now, some of you may take issue because Carolyn Peck played at Vanderbilt, but she was born in Jefferson City. So it's actually, she tells the story about how she chose Vanderbilt over the University of Tennessee, which is quite good. But she said basically it came down to her family, that Vanderbilt came to make a visit, and that her family said, well, who's already decided that Carolyn should go to Vanderbilt? And everybody raised their hand, and Carolyn said, well, I was outnumbered at that point. But she came to Vanderbilt and played in the mid-'80s. She helped them to their most successful seasons to date at that time. And then she went on to become the first African-American assistant on Pat Summitt's staff. And she told me about some wild times with those 4 women right there, including one where Pat told them to take the afternoon off, and they knew where her spare key was at her house, and so they went and stole her boat. Pat lived on the Tennessee River, so they got her boat, went down the Tennessee River, which is runs right underneath Thompson Bowling, called her, they said, from one of those brick cell phones, and said, look down, and we're all just waving at her on her boat. So she said they were part secret society, part roadshow, and I believe it. Carolyn was there for a couple of years and then moved on to some other collegiate jobs, but another great part about her career is she ended up at Purdue University, and in 1998, or maybe 1999, I'd have to double check,
99.
Huh? 99. Purdue won the NCAA Women's Basketball National Championship, and in doing so, she became the first African-American head coach to win a women's championship. Of course, if you have seen her, if she looks familiar, it's because you have seen her on ESPN. And she still remains a basketball analyst to this day, but she was great. She was great. And she was recently inducted into the Women's Basketball College Hall of Fame. And then that brings us to Middle Tennessee, and I'm just highlighting a few people. So there's Tracy Calkins. Alex Walsh and Gretchen. Alex Walsh is in the book. Gretchen Walsh is certainly mentioned in the book, but this was mostly written in 2021. So at that time, Gretchen had not yet exploded, but you know that both of them are extremely successful Olympians, and I've got a slide for them later. But that's Tracy Calkins. That's Chandra when she was running, who's now the TSU coach. And then this is Harriet Hamilton down on the left. She was on the first Fisk University basketball team in 1971. She said that they were the worst team she has ever played on. She said that they got the hand-me-downs from the men's team, so basically their uniforms just hung off of them. She said they looked homeless, was her quote to me. But she not only was on the basketball team, but helped to start the tennis team, and then became a trailblazer in the world of HBCU women's sports. This is her back at Fisk, where she was coaching the volleyball team. She coached the basketball team. She later became the athletic director, the first female athletic director at Fisk. And she is still very active in town. So one other note, I'll plug her. Her father played in the Negro Leagues, was a big star, and she recently released a book about his life. And then Betty Wiseman, who I will send her the pictures and tell her that she was missed. But she started the program at Belmont in 1968. So you know this is even before the I can't even remember the acronym, but before the Tennessee Sports Women's Federation. She was even before that. She had a team before University of Tennessee had a team. Really anybody in the state. They were having to travel out of state to try to find teams to play. And that's her on the right, of course, but you'll see her on the left. She's on the back row, but she's wearing a Belmont uniform. And the interesting story about that is that she was a very, very good high school player, so good that she was on varsity for 5 years. This is before they had all the rules. And they recruited her to play for Nashville Business College, that earlier semi-pro team I showed you. And she came here and then decided, I really want to be a teacher. And so she wanted to go to Belmont. And the president of Belmont, President Gabhart at the time, said, you can't do both. That's too much travel. You won't be able to be successful here in school. And she decided to give up basketball and instead to go to Belmont. She ended up then being at Belmont. I mean, she's still at Belmont, but she ended up being graduating and immediately joining the faculty. And then she established all of those teams that are the women's sports program, but she never got to play college basketball and she never got to play semi-pro. The reason why I love this picture is because there were no rules, and so the first year she coached, she also played. So she did get to fulfill her dream of college basketball. But as she told me, she always knew when to take herself out. I'm not sure I believe that, but. So this is, I'm going to not play this video, but I encourage you all to watch this on YouTube. It is a 12-minute video. You will see some familiar faces like Renee Schultz and Ellen Pethel in the video. But it's a 12-minute video that talks about her journey. I highly suggest it. She has an incredible story. And so it's so great that now there's a story that people can easily access. We've always known how great she is, but now everybody can. So if you just Google, if you're on YouTube and just say the shoulders we stand on, it'll come up. All right, I'm going to see if I can fast forward this without it starting. There we go. You just get the intro. So at this point, I'm going to bring in Renee, and we're gonna share this mic a little bit, because I want to talk about then like where we are now 4 generations later. And so some of the stats that we have here, just look at these. From 1972, we've got a 614 increase in the number of collegiate women who are playing sports. Since 2016, 11 of 12 of the Olympic medalists with ties to Tennessee have been female. It's not on here, but I believe this is right, that approximately 75% of the gold medals in the last 2 Summer Olympics were won by Team USA women. And so a lot of the Olympic coaches will tell you that it's because of this pipeline that's been built over the past 50 years, so that high school teams got better, and then college teams got better, and now there are professional leagues in many sports. So it really has upped our performance on the world stage. And then you can see some other stats there just in Tennessee. We went from 1 in 27 to 1 in 3. And I do like this stat when I said it wasn't just sports that Title IX affected. 94%. This is from a 2019 study. 94% of all female executives in the C-suite have played some kind of organized sport. So I think, it's to recognize that sports isn't just about the season itself and the games you win and lose. It's about learning those invaluable skills of adversity and resilience and teamwork. And so these are some great stats. But with that, I'm going to let Renee tell you a little bit about her story, and then we'll just engage in a little conversation about the moment that we're in now, and then give you a chance to ask us some questions. So Renee, I'll let you take this.
I feel like I'm the color commentator here. Mary Ellen's been leading this. So I'll come in and hopefully provide a little bit of color and a little bit about myself. First of all, Mary Ellen and I became fast friends while she was writing this book. I think she was a little, desperate might not be the word, but she kept reaching out to me to say, do you know so-and-so, or do you know how I can get in touch with this person? And I would provide some contact information. And then she got to number 50 and those vignettes, and she said, I got one more, Renee, I'm pretty desperate, will you do it? So
that is not what I said.
That's what I think happened. Anyway, so through that we've become friends. But a little bit about myself is I came to Belmont in 1998 as a freshman. I told my parents that I was going to fly all the way across the country. I was going to be in Nashville for 4 years. I'm originally from Washington State. And then I was going to move back home. And this fall is now 28 years that I have been at Nashville and 28 years that I have been on Belmont's campus. So it's a place that I really felt valued as a student, and I try to still do that today. I try to value my student athletes, but I was a student athlete. I turned to coaching very briefly shortly after I graduated and realized coaching was not my calling, but a couple of doors away in our office was Betty Wiseman that Mary Ellen was talking about. And I often say, you can't be what you don't see. And so I saw a strong female who was working in administration and was impacting the lives of students. And I said, I want to do that. And so for me, I moved into academic support and really getting to know our student athletes and helping them navigate their journey as a college athlete. And then eventually, I often say I'm not good at staying in my own lane. So I challenge some things. I have a hard time saying no. So I take on more responsibility. And through that, I am now the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Student Athlete Success.
I feel like I need to clap. Let's clap.
On this slide, Mary Ellen said, hey, Renee, find a picture of you playing soccer. So I had to dig up in the archives. I was able to find one. It's blurry, right? You can tell by the times. And then celebrating an OVC women's basketball championship. And I got to cut down some of the net, which is a fun way to celebrate. Mm-hmm. All right, as Mary Ellen said, women's sports is having a moment. And hopefully it's not just a moment, but it continues to evolve. So there are two pictures that I have here that I thought were worth highlighting. First of all, a softball championship here for Belmont. It's the first time that Belmont's softball program has ever won a conference championship. They did it with an All-American pitcher in Maya Johnson, who actually is returning to Belmont to start her graduate school. She actually went into the transfer portal, was the most sought-after transfer for softball this year, and eventually decided that she was going to stay at Belmont. So we're super excited to have her back. But our softball program. And then over here, I have a picture of our women's basketball program. And behind that story that's the WBIT championship. The WBIT is the Women's Basketball Invitation Tournament. And during COVID, when the two basketball programs, men's basketball and women's basketball, went to the NCAA tournament, there was what they called the bubble. And you may have read about the bubble and the discrepancies that the women were having versus what the men were getting. So weight room discrepancies, food discrepancies, gifts that both the men were getting at the tournament and the women were getting at the tournament. Well, at that time, NCAA was running those two tournaments, but there was also, NCAA was running the men's NIT tournament. They were not running the same tournament for the women. So there is a for-profit tournament called the NIT, or the WNIT, which is what the women played in. And from that, the NCAA decided that they were going to sponsor a women's equivalent tournament. Not sure why it took that, but anyways, it did. And so the WBIT tournament was in its second year, and Belmont made it all the way to the championship game. We ended up losing to Minnesota, but all of that is still talking about the growth and evolution of women's sports today.
You want us to both though?
Should we both?
Yeah, let's talk.
Let's talk.
I mean, and here I'll take this out so we're not quite so tethered. So this is a picture of, don't mind me, this is a picture of an event that happened at Belmont. You might think this is Vanderbilt, but Teresa Lawrence Phillips, who is in the book, and she was the first African-American player at Vanderbilt. I'm just stating facts, I'm not throwing shade. Vanderbilt did not start their women's program until the late 70s. So she came in and was on that first team, and she was from Chattanooga, Tennessee. So she had gotten an academic scholarship, but then they asked her to play on the basketball team. So she was on the inaugural women's basketball team. She later becomes an assistant coach at Vanderbilt. She is the one who recruits Carolyn Peck, and then she got a call from Fisk and asked her would she come be the head coach there. She was one of the youngest head coaches in the country. She did a great job at Fisk, and then TSU decided to shimmy in and see if they could get her away to TSU. She went to TSU, coached basketball there, then became the athletic director at Tennessee State University, and just retired, I want to say 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was 2020, 2021 when she retired. And so she is a Betty Wiseman also. And Teresa has been at a lot of events, and it's been amazing. So this was an event at Belmont that was a book event, And I had asked her to be my Renee on that event. But what she didn't know was that I had nominated her, and some others had nominated her for the Tennessee Sports Hall of Fame. And so we had this WellCore event, and I did my thing on the book, and then I turned it to her and asked questions about her life, and she was wonderful. I mean, she really just laid it down. But she said she kept noticing people were coming in the room, and then Candace Story-Lee walks in, who is the current athletic director at Vanderbilt, who sees Teresa as a mentor, and some other people from the Vanderbilt women's basketball staff. And so she said to me later, she's like, I just thought you were really good at getting people to an event. But what she didn't know, and Renee had helped me coordinate this, is that the person from Brad Willis from the Tennessee Sports Hall of Fame had a medallion. And after that event, I said, well, Teresa, we've got one more thing to tell you. And I turned it over to Brad, and he told her that she was being inducted, and it was a super, super special moment. And Betty was there, and so just seeing these trailblazers. But I think the other big part is just really watching that torch being passed from Betty to Renee, from someone like Teresa to Candace. And some of the book events that I did, probably 2022, 23 for most of the schools, is I went to a lot of schools, and some schools bought their female athletes a book, which was great for me. But what made it cool is that, kids don't know what they don't know, college-age students. And so once they heard these panels and heard these women, suddenly they realized that they were standing on the shoulders of giants, and that they were getting to meet them. And so they went from, why do we have to be here, to, I don't want to leave. And so there were a couple of different places where they would take the books, and the line would just go out the auditorium and down the hall, and literally watching the torch being passed, the Trailblazers were talking to every athlete and signing their chapters and connecting. And so I think it really does speak to just to the transfer of generation after generation of a love of sports, because we're now in our fourth generation. We went from baby boomers, and then we went into Gen X, and then we went to millennials, and now we're in Gen Z. So this was a really special day for that. So you'll have to check out Teresa's new page on the Tennessee Sports Hall of Fame. Do you want to add anything to that? You good? Okay. So we mentioned the Walshes, and they're from just right down the street at Harpeth Hall, trained at the Sportsplex with the Nashville Aquatics Club. And I think that this is sort of a amalgamation of Tracy and Alex and Gretchen. But this is them swimming at Virginia. When I say 2024 NCAA National Championships, that's an understatement of the year. They won their they just won their fourth title in a row for NCAA sports. They broke 1 million records. They both have won Olympic medals, Gretchen in particular winning several medals in the last Olympics. And they went to the World Championships and just crushed it. Mm-hmm. So keep your eye on them if you don't know their names. Gretchen is more of a sprinter, and Alex is, she does more of the middle distance, like the 200 IM is her main event. But when they were in high school at Harpeth Hall, they won. You don't have an actual national tournament, but you do have where they score everybody and they look at everybody's times and stats. It's almost like fantasy football, but they look at like who was the best team overall in the nation. So Harpeth Hall was awarded by Swimming World. They were declared the girls' high school national championships, and so there are Gretchen and Alex when they were just young little things. But that's a pretty incredible story in connection to Nashville. And then we've got Betty Wiseman Hall. I'm going to pass it back to you to just talk about her legacy and her Belmont Betty status.
Yeah, Belmont Betty is legendary on our campus. If you see her at a basketball game, the students start chanting her name now when she's there, which is really fun to see. She's 81 years old and is actually still employed. She retired from Belmont in 2013, and Greg Jones, our president, recently re-employed her, and so she mentors.
She meets with them, but the greatest honor that she said that she's had was that they were going to open up a residence hall, or a residence hall named Betty Wiseman Hall. And that could not have been a greater moment for her. She actually was a dorm mom when she was.
Some of her first students actually came back to this opening, but this just opened a couple of weeks ago. It has an esports space in it for students, and I think the greatest thing is there's so many spaces for community.
For connection, and that is what Betty loves the most, that ability to connect with people and spaces to connect. And not only does it have 700 and something beds with beautiful views of Nashville, students aren't going to be living in these spaces when they graduate that are going to have as great views as Betty Wiseman Hall, but it's an incredible space that really honors her and her legacy, and she would say it's the greatest thing that's happened on this campus.
I'll just add to that
I took a tour of this, y'all. I mean, it's like the common rooms. So this is on 15th Avenue, and the common rooms, once you get up to the 10th floor, you can
just a total skyline of Nashville, and they've got freshmen that get to live there. And I went in there and I was doing a video, and I just said, I would like to know for the record that I did not have air conditioning in my college dorm, and now they've got esports. I mean, and I also threw this in there just because this is a new thing, you know, that esports is it's not only in school and colleges, but in increasing.
high schools, it also, there are esports programs. I would tell you more about it, but I don't know that much about esports. But it's been a great honor, and this is the kind of, I would say, beyond Belmont, not a lot of people knew who Betty Wiseman was. And through Title IX turning 50, and also just her national exposure, in part because the Belmont women's basketball team has done so well. She got caught on ESPN dancing, and that went viral. And so I think seeing someone who worked so many years with little to no pay for coaching, and saying yes to everything because she loved it and it was the right thing to do, and it created opportunity for others, girls and boys, young men and young women, that this is one of those amazing and perfect examples of someone who had not gotten the credit that they deserved, now who is getting the credit that they deserve. So I just wanted to sort of like square the circle there with Betty's story. And so with that, I will just give you one last plug. They mentioned I got a book coming out October. When she first asked me about the Summitt, I was like, the book's not out until October. But I have co-written a book with Don Cusick about Minnie Pearl. She went to Ward Belmont, which has connections to both Belmont University and Harvard Law, so that's really my expertise. Don Cusick is a big-time music producer and historian, so he did all the country music things that I was not comfortable doing, because he's got that just in his memory bank. And then, as Ellen mentioned, we do have a Nashville Sites tour coming to the Parthenon, or to Centennial Park, and it should be out sometime in October, so keep an eye out for that. Just go to nashvillesites.org. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you're the first to know about all the exciting things happening at the Nashville Parthenon.